Today's video is sponsored by WD Black. Right now, the only PS5s on the market come with a single internal storage size option of 825 gigabytes, which in terms of actual usable space is only 667 gigabytes, and quite frankly, that's not enough. Now, there is a good reason why this has happened. This is the first generation of systems that has really embraced using internal SSDs as opposed to relying on old-fashioned hard drives, which has allowed for incredibly fast loading speeds in comparison to last generation, and has opened up new possibilities in games that wasn't there before. With these enhanced speeds, though, it has limited the size that Sony could ship the PS5 with, and so adding more internal storage has become a very important issue. Now, this is something that Sony said we would be able to do eventually right from day one. When they first did their initial teardown video, they showed the little expansion slot where you could add your own SSD, but we didn't actually get that at launch. Basically, for the first year since the PS5 came out, we haven't had the ability to expand our own storage. You could use expandable external storage, but that could only be used for playing PS4 games, not PS5 games. And really, originally, you couldn't even store PS5 games on those. That was something they added later, and was still not really solving the issue here. As games have been getting larger and larger in scope, they've also been getting bigger and bigger in install size, especially with 4K resolution now being much more of a standard across a large number of titles. And that's why that initial 825 gigabytes is just a little underwhelming, especially when you consider that the PS4 and PS4 Pro had options going as large as 2 terabytes. Well, now, after a little less than a year since the system came out, after a successful beta test, and now with official firmware support, you can finally expand the internal storage of your system using a properly spec'd M.2 SSD. And so today we're going to take a look at how to properly set that up, install it, and all the benefits that it brings to the table. Before you install your SSD, there's a couple things you want to make sure you have on hand and check first. First of which is, of course, the SSD. In my case, I'll be using the WD Black SN850 with Heatsink. So this meets all the requirements that the PS5 has. It is a 4th generation M.2 SSD. It is the right size and shape so that's going to fit in that expansion bay and not be too large. And it meets the minimum speed requirements. The PS5 needs at least 5,500 megabytes per second of read speed, whereas this one can go up to 7,000, as well as being capable of up to 1 million input-output operations per second. Most importantly of all, though, this model does have a heatsink already attached to it, so it's going to be able to stay nice and cool and meet the PS5's performance demands. Also, it does have built-in RGB, which is really cool if you're using it on a PC. For the PS5, though, that's going to be hiding away. This particular model does come in a couple different sizes. This one right here is 1 terabyte, but they do get as large as 2 terabytes. By the way, if you're interested in grabbing this drive for yourself, I have a link down below, and you can use the code KENSON15 to save 15% off your order. That deal is good until November 1st. Now, aside from having your SSD, a couple other things you need to check real quick. Make sure your PS5 is currently up to date. You do need to be on the latest firmware in order to be able to use the expansion bay for the SSD. If you're not sure if you're up to date, if you don't have automatic updates on, you can navigate to your system settings and force an update to happen. And a couple other little tools you need to have on hand is a Phillips head screwdriver, and I would heavily recommend some kind of cloth or soft foam that you can lay the PS5 on while you're working on it so you're not scratching up one of the plates. So first things first, we need to remove the stand. Now, if you keep your PS5 in the sideways configuration, this is really easy, you just remove it. But if you're in tower mode, you do have to screw off the stand, which I'm gonna go ahead and do right now real quick. You can do this with your fingers if you want, but if you have a flathead on hand, it just makes things a little easier. It's also worth noting that there is a newer model of the PS5 that's beginning to make its rounds that has a slightly redesigned stand, so if this doesn't perfectly match the one you have at home, that's why. Once you have your PS5 laying down on your work surface, the side you want to have up is the side that has the disc tray if you're using the disc version of the PS5. If it's an all digital, you want to have the side up that's the one that's just the pure flat white, doesn't have the PlayStation logo. That's the side that the SSD bay is on. Now, the next part might be a little scary if you haven't removed a plate before, but don't worry, you just have to be a little careful and apply just a little bit of gentle force. What I recommend is having one hand just on the base here to kind of stabilize, and then on this top corner right here, the one that's opposite of where the PlayStation logo is on the other side of the PS5, you're gonna lift and push this way at the same time. There's these little kind of hooks in here that you're gonna pop out of place. So just kind of like that, and there you go. Popped off, no problem. Now from here you can view a couple things. Because this is the disc version, we've got our disc tray right here, the fan right here, but the part we really care about is this little piece right here, which is the expansion for the SSD. This is where the screwdriver comes in. You're gonna wanna use a Phillips head, and you're just gonna unscrew this one right here that's got the little PlayStation button symbols on it. All right, so once that screw is out, we can remove this little cover here. And bam, that is where we need to put our SSD. Before we actually plug this in, one other thing we need to do real quick is there's gonna be this little additional screw that's inside the expansion bay. This is called a standoff screw. This is what you're gonna use to help secure the SSD in place. And thankfully, it's just included inside. All right, so we've unscrewed that, and we're gonna need it for the 80 slot right here. You'll notice that there's different lengths depending on what size SSD you're using. For this one, it's gonna be the 80, right? Pops in place, and you'll see it's kind of popping up right now. That's where this extra screw comes in handy. There we go. All right, so with that done, we just need to seal it all back up. And there, reseal the bay. And then the next step is just to put the plate back on. This is gonna work basically the opposite of how we did it, but it's even easier because you're not afraid of, snapping anything kind of weird. You just kind of lay it on. You'll feel it kind of just find its place on its own, and then just push this way and down at the same time. There we go. And there, your plate is back and reattached. So with our PS5 put back together, let's go ahead and turn it on and finish up installing the SSD. As we can see, it's prompting us right away, letting us know that it detects the M.2 that we've installed. You want to format it so the PS5 can properly read and write to it. All right, give us the read speed right away. We are seeing 6,500 on this one, almost up to that 7,000. M.2 has been formatted. Now that it's properly formatted, you can actually check out in your system settings by going over to storage, and here you're now able to see the different areas that you now have in the system. You've got the console storage, which shows that initial 667 you can work with, but now we have a new option popping up for M.2 storage, showing that we've got 1 terabyte of additional free space now. So before this, my internal storage was already getting near full, and I had to delete a few games over time to make room, so let's go ahead and start reinstalling some stuff and maybe even offload some of what's currently on here over to the SSD. So for instance, we can go over to games and apps on the internal storage. We can look at all the games we have installed, some PS4, some PS5. So let's go ahead and see how quickly we can move stuff. And as a kind of extreme example, I'm gonna take the largest thing I've installed on my internal storage right now, which is clocking in at 90 gigs. Selecting that, we can choose to move it, and I'm gonna move it over to the M.2 storage. Now again, this was something you could do with external storage where you could move files there, you just wouldn't be able to play off of it. But with this internal storage, anything I move to the M.2 SSD, I'm gonna be able to still play on my PS5, which is awesome. And yeah, I mean, we're at almost 100 gigs and it's clipping along pretty quick. And there we go, we just moved that over to the SSD, and that was very fast for 90 gigs. For maybe something that's maybe a little smaller, just to get another idea, we'll offload Astro's Playroom. So this is 10 gigs, almost a tenth of what we did for Final Fantasy. Look at that. It's moved. So with this additional space that we've now cleared out, I can install a lot more games than I did before, and it's very easy to move them around if I want to have a preference over keeping it on the internal storage or on that SSD. Now, while we have the screen open, something else I want to talk about real quick is really taking in how many more games we can now have installed thanks to this expansion. A lot of the games are averaging somewhere around 50 gigabytes. We're getting some that are pushing more kind of the mid 40s. There are other games going above 50, and obviously there are other outliers that are very large, hitting that kind of 90 number, especially if you look at games like Call of Duty, Red Dead Redemption. Some games get very, very large. So without even thinking about those super big ones that really mess up the numbers, even looking at games that are on average 50 gigabytes, that's roughly 13 games you could have installed on the internal storage. Whereas now, thanks to this expansion, it's 33. That is a lot more games and saves a lot of hassle because you never really want to deal with having to delete games every time you get a new one that you want to make space for. Something that I feel is really important to clarify too for a lot of people is that when it comes to physical games, that's not really saving you any space anymore. Games now pretty much always require a full installation, whether you bought it physically or digitally, and so that size it takes up is still an issue. Games are just getting larger and larger, and considering that I basically already overfilled my storage within the first year of using the system, I have more games that are not installed right now that I'm going to start doing right now to make use of this extra space. Having this internal expansion is honestly just an eventual necessity for any PS5 user. The ability to have more games installed, less hassle of having to delete, and just the peace of mind of knowing you can have all your stuff installed and ready to go whenever you want to play it. I'd like to thank WD Black again for sponsoring today's video. If you're interested in grabbing the SN850 with Heatsink for yourself, I do have a link posted down below in the description. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.